presentation of what is the Federal Modern Slavery Act. And so prior to the Modern Slavery Act in the Federal Parliament passing, we had the New South Wales Modern Slavery Act passed by the Honourable Paul Green. I'm not sure if you've been following this work, but their inquiry into trafficking and slavery took place, started in 2016 and continued through. So I was part of the inquiry in the New South Wales Parliament as well, and made recommendations, and their conclusion really was that the UK Modern Slavery Act was something that they wanted to look at and to replicate as well. So the second reading took place in May, and that was passed. So the Modern Slavery Act in New South Wales Parliament has slightly different structure and focus. So as you can see here, part of the purpose is to combat modern slavery, provide assistance and support for victims, provide anti-slavery commissioner. So the New South Wales government do want to have an anti-slavery commissioner based out of there, to provide for detection and exposure of modern slavery, to raise community awareness. So education is such a huge part, both in industry as well as in community, in relation to the supply chain slavery, and of course encourage collaborative action. Its other measures, for example, to further penalise involvement in cyber sex trafficking was something that the New South Wales Parliament also considered. So our Commonwealth Criminal Code covers the crimes of trafficking and slavery as it were, but these bills have a particular purpose in calling for corporate and businesses to account. And the first step to hold them responsible really is through this regulatory requirement to report, to check, to report, to discuss, to educate, and to collaborate. So this is an exciting development, but there are key differences between the New South Wales and federal bill. For example, the New South Wales does have penalties for non-reporting of over $1 million, whereas the Federal Act does not. So these inconsistencies will be something that will have to be worked out as the acts are put into practice. And that again is through that collaborative process. Speaking of which, I'd like to welcome Castern up and to speak to us about sustainable supply chains, because that's why we're here, that's why the acts actually exist. And his extensive experience in China will be seen in his presentation today. He will be talking to us about his time working on supply chain sustainability in several factories and businesses and companies. So please welcome Castern up, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
So, thank you for attending today. It's really nice to hear the details from the Act. I think I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really speak about all the legalistic details and all that, but I think it's an excellent step forward. The fact that there's a penalty in New South Wales will probably drive part of it, and in any case, I think that what the companies need to report has to be aligned, because it'll be the same issues that needs to be reported in both places. So at least you know that there's going to be reporting from New South Wales. Just quickly about me. So I'm originally from Denmark. That's probably you can probably hear from my accent. I lived in China for many years, and I worked with supply chains on behalf of companies like Aldi, Lidl supermarket, which is another big German supermarket chain. Anything everything related to tools, clothing, shoes, electronics, you name it. So I've essentially worked with a bit over 300 factories in China and Asia. I have organized training sessions for about 2,500 factories in China as well on behalf of different organizations. And the impact that the work that I've done in China estimate to have reached about 125,000 workers. It's a tough nut to crack because you want to be pragmatic about it as well. Not everything you see when you walk into a factory is necessarily exploitation. On the flip side, there's a lot of things where you don't realize that might actually be sort of exploitative behavior. So I've actually just been working on a white paper. It is not quite ready yet, but if anybody's interested, I'll be happy to send an email copy of it. So this is the draft, so I'll give that away. So if you just give me your business card, I'll send you the draft copy once it's done, and there's details later on. So basically, just to give a bit of a sort of framework for what is corporate responsibility. Sorry, I should actually take a step back, because I usually try to explain why did I get into this area. I studied business, and businesses have been sort of not thinking so much about exploitation, and just as long as it was cheap and decent quality. So my journey with corporate responsibility started back almost 20 years ago now. I was in India, and I walked into a factory that was doing brake pads. And the workers in that factory room, there's probably about 100 workers. They were manually grinding brake pads so that they could be fitted onto the whatever template that's used to attach it to the brakes of the car. And none of them had any personal protective equipment. Everybody was sitting there doing it with their bare hands and fed into the machine. Everything was totally black covered in dust. And I asked what kind of material it was, and they said it's asbestos.
Oh, wow.
That was about 20 years ago, so hopefully things have improved. In the meantime, I haven't been to any brake pad manufacturers in India since then, but I was like, oh, let me get out of here. I don't want to spend a second longer in this room, but I mean, these poor people, they have no choice. So that's kind of where my journey started. So I think, so it doesn't read very well here. I mean, corporate responsibility obviously covers a lot of different areas. There's the big ones like working time and remuneration. The worst types of issues related to bonded labor, like you mentioned before. It's been a very big issue in China usually that the workers would only get paid once a year. When the excuse was that, look, it's safer for us to hold on to the money for you rather than you putting it under your pillow in the dormitory that you share with 11 other girls. And you could argue that, but on the other hand, it's still not right. The other way is that they might have to hand in their ID papers. These issues are getting less and less in China. They know that they can't do this, but I mean, it's still happening, and there's still examples of workers that come to Chinese New Year and then they go to get the salary and they say, look, we didn't make as much money as we were anticipating. We can only pay half. And then what? So anyway, the good thing about the Modern Slavery Act is that, like you said before, you can't siloize it. You can't just walk into a factory and look for a slave. And you see a pregnant woman who is working with chrome plating, I mentioned that example before. That woman needs special protection for her and for the baby. And you can't just turn around and say that's not slavery. So I'm done. So it all plays in the same sandpit, so to speak. Bribery, corruption, fraud, extortion. If you find slaves, you definitely find bribery as well. The pollution of the environment, the health and safety issues related to the workers. I mean, So these are some photos, and initially I just wanted to sort of talk to photos. So this is photos that I made at some of my visits, and this is on the surface it looks really okay or reasonable for a Chinese factory. So it's how do you identify if this person is a slave or if that one is an underage worker? To me, being a Westerner, I've developed ways of seeing Asian skin type is different from Western skin type, and it seems younger for longer. So you can't necessarily judge a person by the same standards as you do when you're in your own culture. So anyway, this woman here is, or both of them, are using breathing apparatus. They're using eye goggles. So is she a slave or what's wrong with this picture? Anybody can see what's wrong? I mean, on the sort of surface thing. She's wearing them upside down. She's not wearing these ones all day. They just put on the minute I walked in, and they'll be straight off the minute I'm out. And that is what you're dealing with. Right? You can't identify who is. I mean, how do you spot a slave? They don't wear shackles anymore, right? So, but there's a lot of things going on. There's companies in China and elsewhere that rent out these devices, so they know they have an audit coming. They will truck in a whole load of PPE, and it will be distributed to the workers, and they will wear it when the auditor is walking through. I've done this on several occasions, walk through a factory hall, then you turn around, you walk back in, and you see everybody's taking it off. 2 minutes later. So, so there's a lot of things you will see when you walk through. This is actually not too bad. This is stamping from uppers from shoes. So making shoes, and they have the machines that they stamp out the shape so they can create the uppers of the shoes. And all the big pieces, they get collected. So they have a fairly decent recycling system in place. But all the small scraps, they just get left and they go into the local river. And that is normal. Or maybe they ignite it once in a while and burn it off. This is a worker making barbecues maybe for Australian Christmas season. And he's, as you can see, he's welding. And he doesn't have a mask. He's going to get blind. He's using a piece of cardboard with holes for his eyeglasses so he can prevent something going into his eyes. But he's going to go blind if he stays doing that. And then there's all the things you will not see. This is my photo. That's not my photo. But this is a guy in a factory I visited, and we caught him with all the time cards for the workers. So the workers don't actually stamp their own time cards. He does it. So they all stand at the same time. They stand out at the right time. There's no overtime work. Everything's compliant. Just tick the box. So this is young workers. This is from an organization called BSCI, Business Social Compliance Initiative, based in Brussels, that I work with a lot. And I mean, I've been in factories where you walk in and you see some people that seem fairly young, but they know that you're there. So you go open the door and there's somebody hiding, young kids. So why are they here? They came in with their parents, or they came in with a delivery driver, and he just, instead of leaving them in the car, he brought them in, so they're not ours. Lots of excuses, right? And then you have other excuses that seem legit, like a shoe factory I visited where there's young workers on the line, clearly young workers. So the management was all the way back at the factory, the gate was up the front, and the workers were very close to the gate. Management wasn't aware, and it was school holidays in that area, and the parents had brought in their kids. That's a misunderstanding of what the rules are. But is it really child labor, or is it? I mean, I had my first job when I was 14. It's like it all depends, right? Whether they're being exploited or not. So basically, you need to take the culture into consideration, right? This is in Dhaka, and in Bangladesh, and I took this photo out the car window, and to me this looks really dangerous. But I mean, I think to the majority of these people, that's probably their daily life, right? This is another textile factory in Dhaka. Probably not dissimilar to Rana Plaza. Very frequently they lock the emergency exits because they're afraid of theft. They'll have guards, they will not have fire buckets with water in them, they might have a bit of sand, but then they use it as an ashtray or whatever, and then they have this tendency to have different factories on different floors. So if something happens on one floor, the other ones doesn't necessarily get alerted. So, and again, the PPE is very inadequate. I mean, a mask that only just covers the nose like that. I mean, they're clearly being asked to make them themselves, right? From scrap pieces of cloth. These women, they work for below, well, they have Bangladeshi minimum salary, but that's not living wage. So that means they probably can't put all of their kids through school with what they make. Just a little bit about the international developments. Also, Andrea, you also got from Global Slavery Index some information. So, just to compare, well, not apart from maybe the French Devoir de Vigilance, which is based on number of employees rather than turnover. They're quite similar in terms of the requirements and the aims, etc. But I think what's interesting is how you compare in terms of action. So you look at the list here, the most action is in Europe. And the United States is relatively highly ranked. And then of course there's typical slave countries like North Korea, which is known to have slaves. I'm actually a bit surprised that, what's it called, Uzbekistan's not on there, because supposedly they're one of the top slavery countries. I think in a way Australia is we're catching up a little bit. It's a good step, but there's a lot of catching up to do. I think that we need to do this if we also want to support our businesses in the export markets, because American companies, they don't want to buy from somebody who don't demonstrate that they're compliant, demonstrate that they're doing something. In one project I did last year, worked with an Australian agribusiness who is a supplier to a big breakfast company in the US, a breakfast cereal manufacturer. And they signed up for the United Nations Global Compact, and that also means that they want their suppliers to do the same. So if the supplier can't support that information, then they're going to find somebody else. Or at least they should. So I think the benefits already been sort of touched upon as well with you encourage consumer confidence by showing that you care. You're able to deepen your business partnerships instead of just being a question of buying as cheap as possible. You foster that kind of mistrust with the suppliers that means that they think anything goes, and it's not just in terms of labor standards, also in terms of quality and swapping materials for lower grade and pushing your order down the line, etc. Overseas, there's a lot of attention from investors as well. So I know, for example, the Australian building industry is very reliant on overseas pension funds. And they require this information. So if you want to keep the share market more buoyant or more in a better state, then this is an important thing to comply with. And then highlighting the company standards also help you attract better staff, hold on to staff, etc. And then finally, there's actually some positive indications and positive data on consumers actually wanting to pay for it. And this is of course also important because if the consumer don't want to pay, nothing will happen. Right? So there is a growing market, especially with millennials.
So can I ask a question, because it sort of like ties in with the question that my colleague said with regards to what Rachel was speaking about, and also your experience, is the calling out of these practices. You know, like once you've walked away, how do you know that it's not going to continue happening? I mean, do you call them out, and then what happens? I mean, really, what happens? Do they get penalised? Do they?
You gotta have consequences, yeah.
There are no consequences, yeah. You know, and even the positive, you know, like even if it's like media release or whatever. So I suppose this is where I'm sort of like trying to tie in the two, you know, here, you know, the legislation or the bill that's just been done, your work and my friend's question, as in like, how you know, about calling people out on it and making it public.
Yeah.
And not being slapped down for something like defamation. Because you know, I mean, if you've got like 100 million, yeah, I'm pretty certain they've got excellent lawyers. You know what I mean? So this is the thing I'm trying to say. You know, trying to point out here is that, you know, we're doing all these things, but connecting the dots. You know, it still means that we're missing something.
Yes. No, you can't solely place the responsibility on the legal side of things, or the government, the law, or the consumers, or the investors. I think it's a joint effort, and I think while there might be enough people in Australia who have an interest in buying ethically sourced product, there's also the opposite, where the $5 jeans from Kmart is catering to that market, right? As long as they don't know that you can't actually produce a $5 jean to the right quality and for that price and still pay the workers a reasonable wage, then they're going to keep buying it, right? So.
But I guess my point is about the calling out.
I think.
And then, like, is there going to be a reprimand on the person who's doing the calling out?
I don't know about that.
Because it's almost a bit like a whistleblower scenario, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And so, you know, what would encourage people to then sort of like speak out?
In terms of like a cultural shift, like one example I can think of, I think it's Baptist World Aid, or they have like an ethical clothing index that they put out every year, and I think it was Cotton On, maybe they got like a D- 1 year, but consumers were just like, no, we really like this brand, we want you to do better. So I think they went up to B, maybe an A- in a few years. So I think that consumer culture cultural shift does work if enough people are.
So there's a form of digital democracy we're talking about here.
Kind of, yeah. Okay. I think you're right. There's this kind of websites. There's another one, Good On You, which is also trying to do similar thing.
So it's more from positive encouragement than a big stick, man. To change.
I'd say it probably needs both, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at sort of what Nestle has done, where they have some serious forms of exploitation called out in their
They changed their game.
They really did, but they still know that they can't do it all. But what they found is they have made massive efforts to clean it up. They still report on the fact that they still identify it occurring. What they found is that they've been really rewarded for identifying that it's still happening, and that's really driven people to invest more in their products and to have greater confidence in them. So I think that's been a positive demonstration that if you do, even if you are still identifying it, doing the right thing is something that people reward, and that they recognise it was difficult.
I heard from somebody who's a legal counsel in one of the big companies. He said they've been worried about being called out for, I don't know, fake marketing or something by putting some claims on the product that they can't substantiate. Not so much about maybe the reporting requirement, but more about the part that they have to put information out in public, because that obviously makes them more accountable once the information is in the wishy-washy, whitewash, then well, I think the investors are going to walk away, and the consumers are going to know, and there's going to be some NGO somewhere who's going to say, look, this is not good enough. So I mean, that's where say if the requirement is to report, but the report complies with the requirement but doesn't say anything, then you can always call them out somewhere else. But if there's not even a requirement to report, then you have nothing. So
it is a start.
Yeah. So and I think all of this information is available to people who are interested, right? But it's getting it out to a broader audience. I think it's a challenge at the moment. But I think the millennials, we're going to drive that a bit more. And I think overseas business partners are going to drive it as well. I say even when talk about 3,000 companies being subjected to this, I think there's going to be more than that, because all of these big companies who meet the threshold, they're going to require it from all of their suppliers. Otherwise, they're going to say, you can go somewhere else. I'm going to find somebody who can give me this information.
Yeah, that's true, because then the big companies get called out over the issues in their supply chain, don't they? So they've got a small supplier who tarnishes a big reputation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to cascade down.
Yeah.
So something happened with the graph here. This is sort of a chevron graph. So just basically to say a little bit about how to go about it. I think it's pretty common sense. Not that I want to belittle what I usually do, but approaching a problem in the same way as you approach any other problem. You need to define what are your objectives, what goals and metrics is it that you want to meet, and what are the drivers you want to influence. Then you've got to prepare. You need to have a baseline. I've done lots of baselines. I'm a social SA 8000 lead auditor as well, so this is considered sort of the Rolls-Royce standard in social auditing. You need to have somebody going into the factories, looking at what's the situation, understanding where you're at before you can measure the progress, right? So, how is the time? Then of course you need to move through defining your strategy or roadmap to a strategy, and I say in terms of the implementation, I've seen numbers of times over and over again. I've seen companies do like a knee-jerk reaction, say, oh, we've got to do something, let's go out and audit everybody, or we just signed up for SEDEX. So all our suppliers go into SEDEX database, and we need to do audit of all of them, and that is just the wrong approach, because you're throwing money at something that you don't even know what it is you want to measure, you don't know what you're looking for. So don't boil the ocean, right? Start with specific, evaluate what the risks are, and start with some specific areas. Nobody's going to blame you for getting started, right? I'm not going to go into all those details.
So there's just one point on that previous slide that you were just showing, and I noticed it not just in this map here, but in every single piece of work I do. It seems to be a step missing it as well, but that is about validation. So it's making valid, so while you're monitoring and evaluating, it's evaluating the whole process, but is actually what we're doing in terms of the roadmap to a sustainable supply chain, is it actually valid? Like, is it mapping, is it, you might be evaluating against the objectives, but is it valid according to public perception, to the rules at large?
Yeah, sure.
That sort of thing.
Sure.
So there's that one little bit of
you hopefully have that covered in your materiality, right? Whether it's valid, because you need to do your stakeholder engagement when you establish your materiality.
But after the event, after the evaluation, is there not like another feedback loop going back?
Oh, there would be. They're coming under here.
Okay.
So they would go back. It would be a feedback loop. That's not the end point. It's sort of an annual thing, or maybe even more frequent.
Yeah, I sort of think, it's nice to sort of like see that upward curve in terms of the validity. So if we are seeing this shift, this is good to see that, yes, while we're evaluating that, there is also validity that it is actually moving in sync with how society is moving and progressing as well.
Yeah.
So, and okay, how can we then expand upon that? How can we leverage that?
Yeah. I think in general, corporate responsibility as an area still lacks a bit of data in terms of consumer ability to pay and willingness to pay.
Yeah.
A lot of companies doing it perhaps as a risk mitigation measure rather than as an opportunity to perhaps do things better. I think if you can go in and get better relationship with your suppliers, you have an opportunity to improve your product, perhaps even better quality, perhaps other aspects that can make it into a positive business case rather than just a mitigation of risk. So, but I agree with you, you need to circle back, definitely. So a good place to start is with one of all the different standards. It doesn't come through very clearly here, but a lot of businesses are signing up to the United Nations Global Compact. So I think it's really important that the things they tie in together, that there's an alignment with the reporting requirements. So it's not just creating 5 different new reports for the sake of reporting, but that it all sort of ties into an overall objective. And there's lots of standards out there. These are just some of it. There's a very good website called standardsmap.org where they're all sort of laid out, and a lot of them are based around the same issues. So just a few key points to take away from what I want you to go away with. I think procurement T's and C's are going to be updated. There's going to be much more focus on that from the big corporates who are under this legislation. So smaller companies will have to follow suit. I mean, slavery was already illegal, right? So that's not new. So in that sense, I think for me the key game changer here is that ignorance is not an option anymore. They can't say we didn't know, it's not our responsibility. Now it is their responsibility. I think that changes a lot. I think that if a business is going out to create a sustainability program or sustainable supply chain program, it is really, really important not to knee-jerk and say, okay, we're just going to do audits, and then they end up with 500 reports that they don't understand, or they're 25 pages each, and it's too much information, so it just ends up in a corner. So it's important to have some consideration to the process, have a method and a strategy for what you want to look at, perhaps create like an internal audit calendar and say this half we look at that, this next half year we look at that, and have a 3-yearly process where you know which areas you're looking at. And that also enables you to explain to stakeholders saying, look, we know and we have it in our plan, we just haven't gotten there yet. And then I think don't boil the ocean, because it's too much to do in one go. And then finally, get some help, because you can't just put it onto one person. There has to be dedicated resources. So understand the risks, do the due diligence, and don't rush into audits, and communicate, and make sure that there are consequences that are clearly communicated. Be prepared to walk away from a supplier that's not willing to cooperate. There's too many companies who are not willing to do that, and as long as they're not willing to do that. So the risks are manageable, and that means that this is a Chinese good luck thing, so it means if you do it the right way, you don't need to rely on good luck. So that's it for me. Questions? Yeah.
When you do supply chain audits, so when you look at supply chain, how forthcoming are they about their own suppliers? Because wouldn't there be a concern about audit fatigue coming in? How does these platforms like CEDEX and all fit into that?
I think CEDEX is a good step forward, and they help with the audit fatigue, definitely, because if you can find an audit report in there, why pay $1,000 to get somebody to go out and do it again, right? The problem about CEDEX, in my view, is that anybody can upload. So there's no standard. There's no standard or accreditation for who uploads. Right, so anybody can go out and do an audit and upload. If they're members. So that is a bit of an issue. There's other standards that are more stringent when it comes to that. Audit fatigue is definitely a big issue, and subcontracting is an issue that is constantly trying to be addressed because it is a big problem. And you know, I've seen it as well, and they're quite open about it. Seeing factories say, "Oh, we make shoes for New Balance." Then no, we don't actually, but we have it in the showroom too. So why do you have it in the showroom? Well, because we got the order from another factory, but New Balance doesn't know. So yeah, it happens a lot, and it's not okay, and it's not allowed. But as these systems, ecosystems of audits grow, I think they can pull out more data from it. So actually, I don't know if that's been considered in the system of the depository for the reports, but it's really important that it's a structured approach, like a database approach, not just an upload of a PDF, because otherwise you can't get any sensible information out of it. So, any other questions?